Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast. Today is the second part of my chat with Jennifer Stevens, the executive editor of International Living magazine. In episode 41, Jennifer and I spoke about the many benefits of international travel and the key issues to consider for those of you thinking about moving to a different country. Jennifer and I also discussed international living as a good option, both financially and personally, for people emerging from mid to late life divorce. We discussed the lower cost of living abroad and the opportunity to meet like-minded people interested in resetting their lives and finding new adventures. We also discussed some of the major concerns people have about living overseas and many of the unanticipated benefits. Anyway, listen to podcast 41 and you can hear for yourself. Today, we're going to touch on many of those themes, but we're going to go into more detail on precisely what or which countries offer the best opportunities for people looking to move overseas. Every year, International Living publishes its Global Retirement Index, an annual survey of the best countries in the world to retire. Jennifer is going to tell us all about the results of the 2024 Global Retirement Index. Jennifer, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, great to have you back. And, we covered so much good stuff in our first chat, but we really didn't get into the nitty gritty of where people should look to relocate if they're interested in relocating overseas. And, I've been aware of your Global Retirement Index for many years, and I'm always keen to see like the Billboard top 10, which countries are moving up with a bullet and which countries may have slid down the list a little bit. So maybe you could begin by telling us a little bit about this index and how long you've been doing it, and we can get into some of the details.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been putting this out for the last 33 years. International Living's been around 45 years, but 33 years ago, we started this Global Retirement Index. And the idea is essentially to give our members, to give people a tool they can use to help narrow down their choices, to help home in on the spots that would make the most sense for them. We compare and contrast and rank and rate. This year, it's 17 countries, but the number of countries actually changes because the world changes, right? Things happen, right? You have COVID happens. You have the geopolitical landscape changes, and so sometimes countries will fall off the radar, and sometimes they'll come back on. And so every year we kind of take stock of where we are and figure out if a place still makes sense, A, to be on the index, and then B, if it is on the index, where on that index. It doesn't really help to rank every country in the world, because the truth of the matter is you're not going to go retire in every country in the world. Like, the whole point is for this to be useful. And so we try to help you narrow down your options. So it's not that you could not retire comfortably to other countries in the world. You absolutely could, but we're using a certain metric to try to narrow down people's options for them based on priorities that we believe most people will find important. So those include, in broad strokes, 7 categories. For example, housing and the visas and benefits, the cost of living, the development and governance, the climate, the healthcare, things that we believe are important to people. Let me say that all of the countries on this list are places that we believe are safe and that you can retire to comfortably. And we do put a priority on there being good value. So that's why sometimes people will say, well, how come Switzerland isn't on your retirement index? That's a fabulous place to retire. Absolutely. And if you have lots of money and budget is not an issue for you, knock yourself out. But one of the things that we use as a measure of whether a country makes our index or not, one of the main criteria, is that it be relatively lower cost, right? Lower than the US. Or if it's close to what the US is, then at least serves up greater value. So your dollars buy you more, even if you're spending roughly the same, you're living at a much you're living a higher quality of life. So that's kind of in broad strokes what our goal is, to give people who are looking for places to save, to live better abroad, where are the best places to look this year and in what order and why.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because, as you say, Switzerland might be a beautiful place to live, Germany even. But I can think that probably Ukraine is not a terribly desirable place to move to right now. Haiti, the Gaza
Right.
area. I mean, obviously, it'd be kind of silly to include, and it'd be an awful lot of work to include countries that really don't make sense from either the geopolitical standpoint or the cost of living.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
mentioned one category, development governance. Is that kind of somewhat related to political situation? What does that mean?
Yeah, it is. We though it's where we end up putting sort of our infrastructure score as well. So, are the roads good and clean? Is the public transport strong and accessible? Is the internet fast and reliable? Um, if so, and it has a sort of stable political environment, then it's going to get a higher score in that category. So that kind of, we've rolled in sort of infrastructure and governance and those kinds of things that you as an individual probably don't have control over, but you're living in an environment, that where these things that the government provides is the government providing them. I guess that's really
Gotcha.
the way to think
Gotcha.
about it.
I love odd numbers. Why 17 and not 20?
Well, here's the thing. It used to be sort of, I think at one point we had 25, it was the top 25, but then you start putting countries at the bottom that don't really make sense necessarily. So if we felt that we had 25 we could put on here comfortably that would really make sense, we would put 25. So it isn't always prescriptively 17. Sometimes it's 18, sometimes it's 15. During the COVID years, we had fewer countries because I know, for example, Malaysia, we took off because they stopped their MM2H program, which is their visa program for retirees, and it became effectively impossible for somebody to actually go and live there long term. You could go short term and visit, and that would be fine. But if you really wanted to actually go and spend 100% of the time in Malaysia, you effectively couldn't. So that ended up coming off the index entirely, and then it's back on this year because they've kind of fixed up they brought the visa back. So that's kind of part of the reason that it changes, because things happen. So we think, well, I think we can't send people there in good conscience.
Right. Okay. So the index uses these 7 categories, and I
Mhm.
assume that you weigh them. This is the math geek in me coming out. You weigh them, these 7 characteristics equally to come up with an average, and that's how you rank the top 17, right?
Yes, and there's a great debate. Let me say too that this is both partly scientific and partly
Art?
it's partly art. It's meant to be subjective. It is by design subjective. The whole point of having us and our experts with our people on the ground around the world in these countries that we're talking to and we're asking them to fill out, it is subjective how they're filling them out, but we have very detailed surveys that they're filling out for us. We're telling them to go to the grocery store. How much does this cost? And then when, for example, we want to talk about real estate, and housing, what does a 2-bedroom apartment cost to rent in an area that an expat would feel comfortable living? So when you go out online to sort of these like cost of living websites, often they'll say, oh, it doesn't cost that much to live in that country because you can rent here for $300 a month. Well, maybe so, but I don't want to live in that place. Like when we are talking about what housing costs in a country, that in the countries that are on our index, we are comparing apples to apples across all of these countries. So what, for example, would a 2-bedroom place in a nice, safe area where expats live and are comfortable living, what does that cost? So we try to be very real world, this is informed very much by on the ground empirical evidence. Not we used to use we change not I would say every year, but we've over the years this index has evolved. It used to have a lot more sort of statistics in it about everything from rainfall to the number of miles of roads. But the truth of the matter is that those statistics in a lot of countries are not reliable. And also, that's not really, practically speaking, very useful for you. So we have really moved toward making this an extremely real world informed and practical, reliable measure across all of these categories. And so we do have, like, our affinity rating is something we survey our readers about places that they are interested in. Where do you want to go and why? What are you excited about? And that also informs, that's a category that is informed both by our own experiences as our editors and writers in these countries, and also our members who live in these places and visit these places and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of subjectivity to it, but it is informed subjectivity. And to me, I think the real value of the index is that, look, we're not just trying to, we're trying to help you figure out where to go. So this is a real world snapshot of what the life is really like in these places and how much things cost and what healthcare is really like and that kind of thing. So we're not trying to have it crowdsourced in a way, because we can't control the inputs when it is crowdsourced, if that makes
Right,
sense.
right. Okay, I can hear our listeners saying, okay, where to go, where to
Yeah.
go. So we're going to do that right now. But first, I want to say, let's discuss the overall index first. And then you mentioned criteria such as cost of living and healthcare, which might be particularly interesting to our audience. But we'll get to those in detail a little bit. But let's look at the main index first. Coming in at number one, drum roll, please. You tell it.
All right, it's Costa Rica.
Costa
For
Rica.
2024, Costa Rica wins, and with good reason. Costa Rica is really interesting. It has an extremely well-educated populace. It is beautiful country. You can live in along the coasts, both the northern Pacific coast particularly has lots of expats and is fabulously beautiful. You can be on the Caribbean coast. You can be up in the central, like the highlands. The Central Valley has sort of spring-like weather year-round. So the climate in Costa Rica is extremely good. It is a very easy place to settle, and that's the case both in terms of like your visas and your benefits. So that's a measure that we have to consider in all these countries. There's beautiful countries around the world, but if it's really, really hard to go live there, it's not going to make our index, right? Costa Rica, yeah, go ahead.
And English is spoken quite widely there, isn't it?
Yeah, English is, it is a Spanish speaking country. However, kids learn English from a young age. And so and there's lots and lots of expats who live there. And so it's a place that you definitely can go with a very minimal amount of Spanish and live extremely comfortably, enough Spanish to just be pleasant and be polite and get by. You don't really have to speak, depending on where you live, obviously. If you want to go live someplace where the cost of living might be very low, you might need more Spanish, right? So
right. I notice Costa Rica comes in very high on your healthcare rating as one of the second ranked country in terms of healthcare. And as you mentioned, climate came in at I think number 5 on climate.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when you say climate, as you mentioned, different areas. You got the coast and the central area. Where are people going in Costa Rica? What are some specific places?
So they're going to the northern Pacific coast and the southern Pacific coast. So northern Pacific would be towns in and around Tamarindo, for example, or down in the south around Uvita. They are going to the Central Valley, which in San Ramon and Atenas. And these are towns. So there are a lot of people have been retiring to Costa Rica from the United States and Canada for 60, 70, more than that, actually, probably more like 80 years. So there's definitely sort of an infrastructure for expats. I should say too, on the climate category, we have given extra weight to countries that have a little bit of a variety of climate. So because not everybody wants to just go sit on the beach. And so Costa Rica is one of those places that you can be in the Central Valley, and it's not a very big country. So, I mean, you can be on the Central Valley and still go to the coast for the weekend kind of thing. It's not difficult to do. But we do give some extra credit, I guess, to places that have a little bit of a variety. So you can kind of pick the climate you like in this country. I guess in terms of cost of living in Costa Rica offers really good bang for your buck. You can live comfortably as a single, certainly from around as little as, I would say, $1,600 a month in a place that isn't a very, very touristed, to as much as like 2,500 or even 3,000 in a place that that is really touristy. And depending on how you want to live, how do you want to be eating out every single night? Do you want to just to sacrifice absolutely nothing? Not that you really, I should say, people often say, I think I may have said this when we chatted last, people don't feel like they're sacrificing when they move overseas, even if they're living more simply. In some ways, that feels like a benefit, is what they'll say. Like, I'm living more simply, but I don't miss all the stuff, right? I'm enjoying my sunsets, and I'm able to just live comfortably and have a slower paced life, and that turns into a benefit.
Right.
So
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer. I've always had the impression of Costa Rica, and maybe this is because I studied in Spain. I studied in Spain. I lived in Mexico. You mentioned it's been a retirement destination for a long time. Costa Rica is popular with expats. There are expat communities down there. I would dare to say that you could move to Costa Rica, and I don't recommend this, but you could probably move there and not even learn Spanish, right?
yeah, you could, depending on where you live, absolutely. Like if you were in a place like Jaco on the Central Coast, or in Tamarindo, certainly up in the north, that area, that northern Pacific coast, has a lot of expats. It has a big tourism infrastructure and a lot of expats. So for sure. Now, we at International Living believe wholeheartedly that you should always try to learn the language of the country you're going to. We think it's not just polite, but that you will have a much richer life experience. But we also believe that you don't need to speak fluently. There's a sweet spot, and it is not too many lessons into that language. Let me put it
Right,
that way.
right.
So
And
you don't have
Spanish
to
Spanish is
be
not
perfect.
difficult to learn insofar as languages go.
No. And there's
Um,
lots of programs that, in these places, a lot of expats have language in expat communities. There's language exchange programs. And so that means, like, you'll go and, locals who want to learn English and expats who want to learn, we'll use Spanish as an example, will sit across the table from each other a couple of times a week, and you spend half an hour speaking one language, and the other half an hour speaking the other language. And it's a way for you to get integrated in the community, but it's also a great way to learn, to practice.
and as you mentioned, because of this popularity with expats, that Costa Rica is a little lower down the list in terms of cost of living. So, a place like Nicaragua, for instance, which does
Yeah.
not show up on the list this year. Um, let's use an example, say
Well,
Uruguay, which
Uruguay is more expensive, is not the cheapest place.
oh no, no,
You know
no,
what it
Colombia.
Mexico, Colombia, Malaysia,
Yeah.
these are all really low, very low cost, big bang for your buck
Well,
places.
we'll get into that in a second. So
Okay.
let's hold off on cost of living. I
Okay.
want to dig into that, but let's continue and look at a couple more of the top places coming in at number 2. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, was number 1 last year.
Yeah.
Portugal.
Yeah.
Let's go on over
Portugal.
to Europe now. Portugal.
This has been an interesting thing, but because I think people have a perception for a long time, have felt like, oh, Europe is expensive. Like, only Terry Coles, who wrote for us from Portugal for a lot of years, she first retired to Panama and then ended up moving to Portugal. And she told me, I just had dinner with her in Portugal a few weeks back. She said, we used to say, like, well, only rich people like go visit Europe. Like, we don't have the money to be like gallivanting around Europe. But then they decided to take a trip. They were just going to do it. Life is short. They went on a trip and they loved it. And they discovered, well, we can live here very affordably. Like, this is as affordable as Latin America if you're careful about where you go. And so, they then moved to Portugal, and then she wrote for us from Portugal for many, many years. They still live there. But she found Portugal to be extremely affordable. I would say a safe a number to, in terms of cost, to set aside would be anywhere from like for a single person, $2,000 to $3,500 a month in Portugal. You can live very comfortably. It's really not expensive. The thing about, and a lot of the countries that are on our index from Europe they're all very good value spots. Again, Switzerland is not on here, for example, but lots of other countries are.
And Portugal, once again, like Costa Rica, there's a variety of climate.
Yeah,
I mean, I
absolutely.
don't know what people's preconceptions of Portuguese climate are. I would I would tend to think cold and rainy, but other people would think warm and sunny. But maybe it's both.
It's both, right? It's both, and that is right. So along that the Silver Coast, which is that Atlantic coast west of Lisbon, that can be rainier. I mean, the sun comes out, but it is going to be colder and rainier in the winter, right? Because you get farther north. But along the Algarve, which is that sort of at the foot of Portugal, along the coast there, that is sunny, and it is sunny 300 days a year. It is really sunny. It's beautiful. I was just there. It's absolutely gorgeous. And that area is where lots of people from colder spots in Europe have come and have been vacationing forever and own condos, or come and visit. It's where the rest of Europe comes on vacation for warmth in the winter. But Americans are coming there definitely in many greater numbers. That's a place that kind of hit the big time, I would say, last year. Everybody started writing about Portugal, and it really jacked up the cost of living, or not really the cost of living so much, but the cost of housing, particularly in Lisbon and in Porto, in the bigger cities. And that is why one of the reasons that Portugal fell in our listing this year, because the cost in some places just got too high. Also with Portugal, until this year, it had a golden visa program, which allowed you to invest in real estate. I think it was at a low level. It was about, depending on where you were, between $250,000 and $500,000 in real estate. You would get permanent residency in Portugal automatically, and they've put an end to that program with the real estate. You can still do it, but not through buying real estate. You can still invest and get residency, but there's a different function now. In part because it jacked up that, as I said, that cost of property everywhere, because people were just buying properties and letting them sit. And then everyone in Portugal couldn't afford to find a place to rent or buy anymore because the prices of the properties had gone up. So that's kind of why Portugal fell a bit. But I would say across our index, for it, if listeners go and check out check out our index after, you'll see the numbers are also very close. You know what I mean? Like everything, you could retire comfortably and live well in any of these countries. So it's not that like the last one doesn't mean, oh, it's not worth it. I mean, the whole point of narrowing it to this number was that all of them are worth it.
They're all affordable.
Right.
All right. Coming at number 3, country very close to my heart. I worked there for a couple of years, and I've traveled fairly extensively. Our neighbor to the south, Mexico.
Yeah, I love Mexico. Mexico's great.
So much in Mexico. I don't know. A lot of people think of Mexico, they may think of Cancun or Puerto Vallarta or Baja, but and those are all great places. I mean, I love those the beach places, but I got to say my favorite areas are the colonial highlands areas, the Querétaro, San Miguel de Allende, of course, Mexico City, Cuernavaca. Tell us a little bit about Mexico, and where does it stand? I mean, 3 is pretty high. Where was it last year? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
I know. I sorry, I dropped one on you there.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
But it's always been.
It might have been 2. It was either 2 or 4 last year, I think. Mexico.
So what are you seeing in terms of people going overseas, not overseas, going south to Mexico?
Going south. Mexico is arguably the easiest and most convenient place, if you're American, to go retire overseas. It's just, you don't even have to fly. You know what I mean? It's really easy. And Mexico makes it easy, especially if you want to go part-time, that you can go on a tourist visa for 6 months. And so it's very easy to just go to Mexico and spend the winter. Kind of lots of Canadians do that. And lots of Americans do as well. So that's one reason that Mexico hits there toward the top. Pretty much, it's in the top 5, I would say, almost every year probably. But something you said is true, that it has such variety. So those colonial highlands, Lake Chapala area, there are huge expat communities in various areas of Mexico. So sure, there are expats in Cancun, but Cancun ends up being that's really more of a tourist place. But along the Baja, there are communities where there's lots of expats in La Paz and in just south of San Diego, because it's very similar to San Diego at much less cost in terms of the landscape and the benefits that you have. And then down as far south as Cabo, though Cabo is getting, because of all the tourism, is getting more expensive. And so people, I think, people who might have gone to Cabo to retire are now looking a little bit north on the Baja to other places that are a little less expensive. And then the colonial highlands. And of course, there is also that Caribbean, the Yucatan. So there's Merida, which has a huge expat population. It's a big city. It's a city of over 1 million people, but it's very hot in Merida.
Yes.
And so It's beautiful. I mean, it is just a fabulous city, but it is very hot. And so sometimes people live in the city and then they have a little casita, they have a little cottage on the beach on the Gulf side, and then they spend the summers kind of living out at the beach because it's so hot. But then also, of course, in that what we call the Riviera Maya, which is down from between Cancun and Tulum, and there's lots of expats who live along there as well, though that's much more touristy typically.
Right, right. You know, indeed, there are some places in Mexico, you know, among the Riviera Maya, and I think it's getting that way in Puerto Vallarta as well, and Los Cabos, where you don't even need to learn
Oh
Spanish.
yeah,
Although
absolutely.
one,
Well, even in like Lake Chapala, which has
right,
great weather, that's not too far from Guadalajara, and easy in and out. If you're in Lake Chapala, lots and lots and lots of Americans live there. They have a huge Lake Chapala is interesting. Americans have been in that area for many, I mean, close on 100 years probably, and they have a very well established like the Lake Chapala Society. They have a library. They have concerts they put on. They have a huge infrastructure for volunteering, for clubs, and so if you go, sometimes people think, oh, I want to go to another retired another country and enjoy all that local culture. I don't want to be near other expats, and that's fine. Some people are like that, but some of the benefits of being an expat um, uh, enclaves are that you can slide right in. Other people have figured out how this country works. And so you can kind of ride their coattails, and also that infrastructure exists. So if you want to volunteer in the schools, or you want to, you want to be play pickleball, or whatever it is you might want to do, that is happening in those expat spots. And there are many of them in Mexico.
you know, the thing about Mexico, which makes it, you know, probably still my favorite country, although I'm exploring the world more and more these days. And maybe this, I don't know if this could somehow be incorporated as criteria in your in your index. It's just the friendliness of the people. And I think learning some Spanish goes a long way to connecting with the locals. And obviously they're probably not going to be as friendly. They're still going to be friendly in Mexico City, but not as friendly in Mexico City as they might be in a smaller city or a less tourist popular area. But I'm curious, looking at these 17 countries, if put you on the spot here, if there was a criteria for welcoming locals and friendliness, what would be the top two or three countries that
Oh,
you've
you are putting
experienced?
me on the
I
spot.
know, I know.
Um, you know, I have to say, this is my opinion because I think I think that's pretty subjective.
Yes.
Like, so I don't know, my opinion, and I've been to, I think all of
Oh,
these
I don't know.
countries.
I think you can make a
Um,
scientific, objective
yeah,
analysis of friendliness.
I would say that Portugal was incredibly friendly. The people in Portugal were incredibly friendly. I was just there a few weeks back, and I just couldn't even believe how friendly they were.
Mm,
And I would say that I found Malaysia,
mm,
interestingly,
mm.
to be very friendly as well. I felt when I first went that it would just be a really hard country to get. You look different. That I would feel different. The languages are different, but people were very, in both Malaysia and in Portugal, very ready to smile, very very welcoming. And so, but I think, to be honest, this is true in all of these countries. Like, obviously, some places are going to have a little more reserve than others. I would say, I've spent lots of years over the years living in France, and people say, oh, the French, they're not friendly. I don't find that. I find the French quite friendly, but they're definitely more reserved
Yes,
than, say, the Spanish and their neighbors, right? The
yes,
Spanish are
yes.
much more sort of relaxed and open than the French. They're not necessarily more friendly. They're just immediately more accessible than the French might be. So I would say that all of these countries are friendly, um, genuinely. And if they weren't, because I think that is part of the reason they're on the index, and we have our affinity rating, and part of that is sort of how easy is it to make friends? How easy is it to get integrated just into the places that you're living? And that friendliness comes into play in that affinity
All right. Well,
rating.
I
That's
throw in the suggestion box for the affinity rating,
okay.
friendliness of locals.
Fair enough.
But for our listeners, because I have a copy of the report in front of me, so Malaysia came in at number 8 on the index, and was the other country you mentioned? France, number 9. So France was actually well, Spain is number 5,
Mhm.
and not surprising, Panama at number 4. I remember Panama was about 4, maybe 10 years ago, was around maybe you correct me, but I remember Panama was around number 1 or was number 1 for a
Yeah,
while.
Panama has won. I think Panama has actually won our index more than any other country if you looked across all of the years that we've done it. And it's not that Panama somehow is worse than it was last year. I mean, these things, if something happens in one country that makes the number go up, then by definition, something else has to go down. We can't
Right.
give everybody the same score. So Panama is a great Panama has a lot to recommend it. One of the things that Panama is great at is healthcare, for example. And that's not true in other countries as well. But Panama it's south of the US. So in terms of your time zone, you're kind of in the same area, you're just south of where we are now. So that makes kind of dealing with things back home easy. But Panama, very friendly, lots of Americans, lots of people speak English. It has extremely attractive visa rules. So you can get a long-term visa, permanent residency in Panama extremely easily. They have something called the Pt2 program, which was created many years ago to attract foreign retaillees. You're not allowed to work on that visa, but work locally, take a job from a local, but you are able to spend your money there freely, and they will make it easy for you to come. You can, and once you reach retirement, you can get a pensionado visa without being of like official retirement age. But then once you are of a retirement age, which is 60, 65, something, 60, I think, then you're able to access all of the same kind of discounts and benefits that Panamanian retirees can access. So that's like percentages off of your airfare and off of all of your meals and your healthcare and
Wow.
everything else. So it makes it even more affordable. Panama is a place where people regularly they have a housekeeper who cleans for them. They might, and maybe cooks for them. If they have a yard, they may have a gardener who gardens for them. The cost of living there is really affordable, and you're getting a lot of bang for your buck in Panama. And it's a very Panama City is a full on, it looks like Miami, right?
I
It's a
know.
full on city. And so you can kind of get anything you need. You're not at the end of the earth when you're in Panama. So even when you are at the beach an hour and a half outside of Panama City, you've got this huge city. It's like having Miami down the road. So you can get anything you need. And again, the healthcare, so that ease with which you can gain permanent residency is key. They have lots of American expats and Canadian expats who live there, so you can be integrated into communities quickly in that regard. And then that healthcare is really good. There's a Johns Hopkins affiliated hospital in Panama City. Panama City is where a lot of Latin America goes for its good healthcare. And
Interesting.
so it makes a lot of sense. And it's not, it is not expensive, relatively speaking. So yeah, so Panama is always a good deal. And like other places on the index, Panama has a little highland area where the weather is a little more spring-like. It's a little rainier. It's kind of up in a cloud forest, but it's very pretty. And there's lots of expats who live up in the hills, and they have like a 12-month growing period, because just in a sweet spot with the weather and the climate. And so as a result, like, you get all this wonderful fresh food and fresh vegetables. And you can, if you like to garden, I mean, you can just stick a stick in the ground and it will like sprout and flower. Like, it's crazy.
Oh, my
So
wife is going
Panama's
to my wife is going to
beautiful
want to
for
move to
that.
Panama now.
Yeah, and then of course it's got, if you look at the map, Panama's got a lot of beaches, right? And so there's
Yeah.
lots of beach opportunities as well. So yeah, Panama is a really interesting option for people.
Okay, so in the time we have left, I wanted to focus on probably two key concerns for our audience: cost of living and healthcare. And I'm looking at a list of International's list of the top 5 cheapest places in the world to live, and the 5 countries with the best healthcare for expats in 2024. And the least expensive place to live, number 1, is Colombia, which comes in at number 10 overall on your index. And it also comes in at number 5. In fact, it's the only country on the index that comes in at the top 5 in both cost of living and healthcare. It came in at number 5 at healthcare. And so I was curious, and I thought, well, why is Colombia not in the not higher up the list then? And then, it occurred to me, well, of course, people think of Colombia and they think of Pablo Escobar and political instability. I went to Colombia 3 years ago and spent 2 weeks there. I had a great time, and I was in Medellin, which
Hmm.
is the city notorious for being Pablo Escobar's fiefdom. But I didn't see any of that, and people were quite friendly, not as friendly as Mexico. Um, but I had and I spent some time. I picked coffee beans. I went hiking. I had a really good time in Colombia. So perhaps you could touch a little bit on Colombia, maybe, why is it not what Americans' perception of Colombia and the reality, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think there is this, what I would say really is an outdated, almost misperception that it's a dangerous place to go, that it's still the drug cartels are taken over or whatever. That is in the places in Colombia that we recommend, that is not the case. So Colombia is an interesting country. It's a well-educated country. It is a place. This is a little factoid, but I just think it was always very interesting to me. My colleague Ronan McMahon, who's our real estate expert, he said that when people build homes or condos or building anything in to live in Colombia, one of the questions they ask you is, where do you want your bookshelves? The point being that in America, where you
Wow.
build a house, it doesn't come with a bookshelf. Like if you
Wow.
want bookshelves, you got to get it. You got to go get them made. But in Colombia, everyone has bookshelf, right? And so it's a very well-educated, sophisticated culture. It's an interesting culture. It offers very great value. So it is both low cost and you're getting great bang for your buck. So in Medellin, as they say
Regime.
locally, Medellin, you can live in an apartment. If you're renting just for a short period of time, a really nice like penthouse apartment in a building that has like a pool on the roof and that kind of thing, very like nice, super fancy, might cost you maybe $3,000 to rent short time. But if you're
Right.
going to go and live there permanently, live there full time, you can find places to rent for much less. You just have to do a little bit walking around and find them, right? And I think healthcare in Colombia, I think it was LASIK eye surgery was invented in Colombia. Like they have a very sophisticated healthcare system. And so the healthcare in Colombia is also excellent. And that also it's both excellent and low cost, which contributes to the overall low cost. Because as we all know here in the United States, one of the reasons that it is so expensive to live in the US is because of the cost of our healthcare. Right. I mean, if you could just lower the cost of your healthcare to a few $100 a month, we'd
Right.
all have more money to spend. Right.
Right.
So I mean, that's one of the reasons that the US is so expensive. So Colombia is very interesting. It does still suffer a bit from that misperception, I think, of how safe it is. But our folks on the ground love it there. They feel like they've found a gem that everyone else shouldn't really know about, but they're feeling pretty good that they got there first.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very, very appealing place. And there's once again, so many different types of geography and climate
Mhm.
in Colombia. Just looking at your list of for our listeners, um, International Living's list of cheapest places in the world to live, the top five: Colombia, followed by Thailand, Malaysia, Ecuador, and Mexico. Another plus for Mexico
Mhm.
for expats. Thailand at number two. Um, my wife and I watch a lot of YouTube videos on our big screen TV, and usually we're pulling up travel videos to get some inspiration for
Mhm.
where to go next. And she's been watching a lot of these Thailand videos, in particular a community called community. It's probably a big city, Hua Hin,
Yeah.
and looking at the houses in Hua Hin. I mean, beautiful houses for half the cost of what we would pay, with pool and a community amenities, all that sort of thing. So, can you just give us a brief overview of Thailand and where expats are looking there?
Yeah, so there are a lot of expats who are in Bangkok. That's not where most of our retirees go. That's a huge city, and a lot of people are there for work kind of thing. So while that is a very cosmopolitan city, it isn't. We write about it, but it's not a place most people are going to go retire. But I would say like Wahin, Chiang Mai, particularly Chiang Mai, which is in the north, the climate is a little is more mild than in Bangkok. It's a lovely city with a very historic core, and then on the that you can live in, but then on the exterior, modern apartments and buildings. And Thailand isn't a place that we usually recommend people buy property because the rules around um, who has real ownership to it, title, and so on are a little sketchy depending. So we usually recommend in Thailand that people rent. But in any event, you on a budget of $2,000 a month, you can live really, really well. As you said, you can see these houses that are renting for, oh my gosh, next to nothing. I mean, when you consider in fact, Jeff Opdyke, who's one of our correspondents, he and his wife are going to, they're moving. They're based in Portugal right now, and they're going to go spend the summer in Thailand because they found such good deals on places at the beach. And I actually think it may be Wahin where they're going, but it was such a good, I mean, they could rent, I want to say it was for about $1,600 for the month, this place on the beach with a pool, like right on the beach, literally on the beach.
Wow.
And, he's like, it's, if you even, we fly everybody and we stay there for the summer, and it's still going to be cheaper and we get to be at the beach all summer than it would be if we, go stay at our place in Portugal. So yeah, there's a lot of good
Wow.
value in Thailand. And I had thought that Thailand might be difficult to navigate given that, the script, not just the language, but the way the language is written is so different. But it turns out all the signs are in English also. So it turns out that if you do not speak Thai, it's actually easier to get around than if you say don't speak French in France. You know what I mean? It's
Wow.
easier to get by in Thailand, I have found, than in a lot of other places. So that was like an interesting thing. And the Thais, I think this is true really around, I mean, the English is the lingua franca around the world these days. And so young people speak English. And so I think that and there's big expat populations as well, like in Chiang Mai, for example, like you really don't, I speak obviously no Thai, and I spent a few weeks roaming around and had no problem talking with expats and finding people and that kind of thing. So.
And if you like Thai food,
Oh yeah, the food is so good. The handicrafts are beautiful. The culture is just so interesting. I mean, in Chiang Mai, you've got monks with their orange robes, and it's sort of it feels a world apart, but it is not an unfriendly world, if that makes sense. It is very different and distinct, but it is interesting, and the Thai people are so friendly and so they call it the land of smiles, and that is not a misnomer. I mean,
right.
it is, people are so smiley and so welcoming and they are proud of their culture and their country, and they want to share it with you. And so I think Thailand is one of those places that if you are interested in expanding your horizons and understanding about how other cultures work, and that's a place that you can do so with such enthusiasm and it'll be rewarding because it is a genuinely interesting culture, and they're happy to
it's
share it.
definitely on my list. I've yet to travel to Asia. I'm ashamed to admit. So I think Thailand's going to be top of the list after maybe even next year. Briefly touch on healthcare. Top 5: Portugal, Costa Rica, Spain, France, and Colombia. Portugal, we've touched on that, comes in at number 2 overall, number 1 in healthcare. Very popular spot. Costa Rica comes in at number 2 in healthcare, number 1 overall. And then Spain and France, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, these are developed European countries. Mind you, where does Canada and the US come in on healthcare? Like 29, 35?
Right.
I mean,
That's the thing. I mean, the quality, it's not just the cost of care, it is also the quality of care. And, if you have an acute issue in the United States, you can get good care exists in the United States, but it is less accessible than it is in a lot of these other countries. So it's not that you can't get good care in the United States, it's just the average person may not get it. And so in these countries, in France and Spain, for example, particularly they have, socialized medicine basically. And so for a one-time fee in France, just to give you an example, it comes to about $2,200 to $2,700 per couple. It's a fee that's based on your taxable income, but keeping in mind that it would probably be less than that because your taxable income in France does not include pensions or Social Security or investment income. And so if you're retired, your taxable income is pretty low. So the cost of qualifying for that healthcare is a lot lower too. In Spain, it's going to be around $250 a person per month, but that includes everything, right? Absolutely everything. So, this is the thing. People are kind of shocked all over the countries on our index. Our folks on the ground report that my doctor just gave me his cell phone number when I was done after I had my knee replaced, and I was able to just text him if I had any questions or, it's so friendly. And
Yes.
people, it is slow paced. People get the care that they feel, like the attention that doctors in the US, aren't allowed to give anymore, basically. They've got their 20 minutes or 15 minutes with you and that's it, or whatever it might be. And that does not happen in other countries. So people who are expats, who are our folks on the ground, report that the care is pretty extraordinary, actually. So it is both better care and at a small fraction of what it costs in the US. I know in Portugal, for example, you can get residential long-term care for 2,000 euro a month, which, I mean, 2,000 euro a month, long-term care, full on in the I don't know what that costs in the United States, but it's a lot more than $2,000 a month.
Yeah, no, it's a lot more, a lot more. Well, there's a world of options out there, which is really what your index is about, which is what international living is about. And I strongly recommend that our listeners go to internationalliving.com, where you have a free abridged version of this guide. Now, this guide itself is 200 pages and it's available free to subscribers of International Living, but there is a shorter version that's free on your website. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'll give you the link. You can put it under
Great.
your show
Well, I'll
notes
put the
there.
link to that in the show notes on the Great Divorce Podcast webpage, which can be found at transcendretirement.net. So transcendretirement.net, I'll put the international.com link and the internationalliving.com link and the link to the abridged report. Jennifer, once again, thank you so much for your time. Very informative discussion, and just encourage people for anybody who hasn't dipped their toes in international travel. There's a world of things to learn and see and do out there. Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
and
Jennifer. I'm sorry, any
absolutely.
last words, Jennifer?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, even if you're not really ready to retire overseas full time to any of these places, our list is a great list. It's a great measure of places to go travel because they're
Exactly.
all going to be good value. They are all going to be friendly. They're all going to be places that you can settle in. If you go on our website and explore, you can see the towns we like and that kind of thing. So it's also just a great guide for sort of, if you're not sure where to go next, this is a good place to start. So even if you're not, it's called our retirement index, but it's also just a nice place to spend time. So these places are useful for that as well.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And I've used the retirement index as a guide of places to visit. So yeah, that's a really good point. You don't have to move there. You can just get a feel for it. Jennifer, so thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. I had a really nice time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Great Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.